Tuesday. We would like to dedicate our session on shipbuilding to Yakhanov, that was a very important scholar in our topics, and did a lot for us and for the advancing of our studies. And you really, everybody of you know him, so the most important accomplishment was the Mahagan project, from the excavation, conservation, restoration, display, exhibition, and also building of a replica. So really we would like to thank him for his work and to remember him in this shipbuilding session. So I would like also to tell you that all the articles of Yak are now available on the INJNA review, and they are free on download. So the editor, Miranda Richardson of the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology, would like to tell to you this, that is possible to download free all the articles. This is important. I have another important communication, and is about of course, the booths of Honor Frost. So the archive of Honor Frost, people that want to share memories and souvenirs on Honor Frost has to do now, because it's the last day today. So now I would like to introduce our first speakers, that is Manuel Dante from France, Le Mans University, and that will speak about the Syracusia and the reassessment of the tonnage of this important part of classical shipbuilding archaeology, and that was very important and very discussed by scholars, previous scholars. So we are happy to see what you will present. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, would you know where is okay, thanks. First, I would like to thank the organizers to give me the opportunity to deal with Sicily and Alexandria, two locations which were very dear to Honor Frost. I'm going to talk about the Syracusia, which establishes such a link between Sicily and Alexandria. You know that Syracusia was a very famous was a very famous ship which was built by Archimedes in the middle of the 3rd century BCE, as he was ordered by King Heroes II. And the evidence mainly relies on a very, very long description written by Athenaeus, and he gives many details about the architectural features and also about the contents of the cargo. And the contents of the cargo is very interesting, because many scholars focused on this cargo and try to estimate the overall weight of the cargo in order to determine the tonnage of the ship, and thus, therefore, to determine the top limitation of the ancient ship construction. However, there is an issue about who wrote the text, who actually wrote the text, because it was written indeed by Athenaeus, who lived in Egypt during the 2nd century CE. But he says at the very beginning of his long description that he rewrites. He has just copied a text of Moschyon. Who is Moschyon? He is almost unknown. He should be an Hellenistic poet of the 3rd or 2nd century BCE. Then, who is the actual author? And was there any change between the time of Moschyon and the moment and the time when Athenaios rewrote the text? So it's important because we would like to know which methodological system was used in the description of the contents of the Cariacera shipwreck. And if we take the evidence, we can see indeed that we can read the text here, and they put on board the ship, I read in Greek, Situ myriadas ex, 60,000 measures of corn, and 10,000 jars of Sicilian salt fish, and 20,000 talents weight of wool, and of other cargo, 20,000 talents weight also. So if you see very cautiously the 60,000 measures of corn, you see that in Greek there is no unit, no ancient unit of measurement. He doesn't mention anything. Thus, what is the missing unit? Fortunately, there is another text of Tzetzes coming from the Kyliades, but Tzetzes is a very, very late author of the Middle Byzantine Empire. And he says in his text that the cargo included pente murio medimnon. It means it included 500,000 medimni. But this is a very late text, and we have to be very cautious. But maybe we can think that this missing unit could be the medimnos. That was supposed, that was suggested by many scholars, such as Thor, Grazer, Frank, and Rouget, who suggested to use a medimnos of 52 liters. It would mean something like 40 kilograms about. And if we use, if they used an amphora of 50 kilograms too, and a talent of 26 kilograms. Thus, they estimate the overall weight of the cargo to 4,000 tons approximately. And later, Casson, when he retranslated the long description of Athenaios, he insists on the fact that this missing unit is surely not the medimnos. Indeed, he thinks that Athenaios did change the unit of measurement given by Moschyon, and that Athenaios used, who lived in the Roman period, he thinks that Athenaios used a Roman unit and maybe the modius. So Lionel Casson suggests another estimation. He used a modius of 8.7 liters. It means something like 6.6 kilograms. For the amphora, at first he used an amphora of 25 kilograms, but he was suggested by Valenga to change it because many underwater excavations led to the discoveries of amphoras, and many of these amphoras had a weight of 50 kilograms. That's why Casson prefers a weight of 50 kilograms. And he takes also a talent of 26 kilograms. But as he chooses a modius of 8.7 liters only, and not a medimnos of 52 liters, it lowers very much the cargo of grain, which is only 400 tons. And thus, the overall weight of the cargo is now 2,000 tons. It means half of the previous estimations. However, Casson's suggestion should be rejected. First, because it lowers too much the grain cargo. As you see, here it's 400 tons. It's less than a quarter of the overall weight. And Athenaeus, in his description, insists on the fact that it is that the Syracusia was first of all a grain freighter. So it can't be a grain freighter if it's only a quarter of the amount. Moreover, the modus was not used in Egypt during the 2nd century. Meyerson, in his paper, precised that this unit was used indeed in Italy during the Republican period, that it was used in the Western Mediterranean and some parts in the Eastern Mediterranean, but actually it was not used in Egypt before the very, very late antiquity. And during the 2nd century CE, it was not used in Egypt. Thus, I think that the modus can't be the missing unit used by Athenaeus. So, what could be this unit, actually? What unit was used in Egypt during the time of Athenaeus? It was the ataba. The ataba was used since the Persian period and through the Hellenistic period and even the early Roman period. Meyerson calculates his ataba at 29 liters. It means a weight of 22 kilograms. And if we look more precisely on the keramia of Sicilian salt fish, it is interesting to see that the recent excavations have shown an amphora, which is called which Gerald Wittgenstein called the tubular amphora, and Emmanuel Boss studied this amphora, which is dated of the 2nd and 1st centuries CE. It's a little later than the Syracusia, but it is the closest parallel which can be found. And this tubular amphora looks very like the Dressel 2122, which was a full 40 kilograms when full. If we look also at the talent of 26 kilograms, which was used by all the previous scholars, should be rejected because the talent of 26 kilograms was used only in Athens during the 5th and 4th centuries. And during the Hellenistic period, especially in the Ptolemaic kingdom, the talent was only 20 kilograms. Thus, the amount should be something like 2,500 tons. 2,000 tons and a half, and maybe there could be another hypothesis, a last hypothesis. Maybe Athenaeus lets the units given by Moschion, and maybe Moschion used the Sicilian units. It's much more difficult to find the Sicilian units because there is no much evidence about it. But recently, Whitehall published Sicilian grain measure, which was used in all the kingdom of Hieros II, and this measure was something like 32 liters. It means 25 kilograms full. You will notice that it is very close of the ataba. The amphora is still 40 kilograms, and the Syracusan talent should be more or less 20 kilograms. Thus, the overall weight should be something like 2,000 tons and 700. As you can see, the weight of the cargo should be much reappraised. It should be really reconsidered. But we have to be cautious. As you see, it's very hard. Meteorology is a very hard field of research, and it's hard to determine very accurately the tonnage of the Syracusia for this reason. But you will notice the very strong similarity of both methodological systems and of the results of the third and fourth hypothesis with the Egyptian and the Sicilian units. You notice that the amount is almost the same. It's almost the same, and it should be explained maybe by the fact that the Sicilian meteorological system could have been adapted to the Egyptian meteorological system. And it would not be very surprising as the relationships between these two locations, between Sicily and the kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom, were very, very strong at this period, as the symposium published in 2004 shows it. And it's not a coincidence if when the Syracusia was built, you know that her draft was really too important, too big, and she could not enter most of the harbors of the Mediterranean. Thus, Hieros II gave the ship to one of his ally, one of his friends, who was Ptolemy III, actually. So it gives an idea of the very close relationship between all these, between Sicily and the Kingdom of Egypt. It shows the close relationship between these two locations in the ancient times, and it was also very important in the life of Honorfrost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Very interesting presentation that raises some questions about dimensions also of the ship. We have, time for short questions. Elena Flavia.
No. Hello. So, thank you very much for this presentation, which I enjoyed really very much. About the meteorological systems, why do you decide to compare the system between Egyptian and Sicily? Because, I mean, the Syracusia has been built in Sicily by Hieros II, with the help of Archimedes. So all of the bulk, when Hieros II decided to gift this giant vessel to Ptolemaeus Philopater, I think, he converted the ships from a warship to, well, also, it was more than a warship, it was a luxury floating, luxury giant ship. No? So he decided to convert this ship into a granary ship. And so the meteorological system, it could be from Hieros II background, from Sicilian background, Sicilian meteorological system. So I wonder why you think it's useful to compare the two systems.
Actually, there are, I'm hesitating between both of these systems because the Sicilian system, of course, could be used for as the amount of the cargo is mentioned was used by Hieros. It was about the cargo which was used by Hieros II, so maybe it should be in the Sicilian. It should be in the Sicilian system. But the main system which was used during the Hellenistic age was the Ptolemaic one. And Assynaeus, when he writes the text, when he copies the text of Moschon, maybe he has converted from the units, from the Sicilian units. That's why it's very hard to choose between both of them.
It's a point of view, and even Moschio, it was from Syracuse.
Yes.
So the main source of Athenaeus. So it's, well, thank you anyway.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, there are other two questions, but very short, please. Patrice?
Just a remark.
All right.
Yes, from a nautical point of view, the hypothesis proposed by Emmanuel is quite right and gives us answer to the problem, because the modius is too low and the medium is too big. And I don't know if it is the Artab or the Syracusean measure, but it looks more coherent with the type of the boat.
Yes, about, of course, you're right, and about between the Sicilian and Artabar Egyptian measure, it should be emphasized that actually it's the same. It's 32 liters for both.
Okay. No. Now,
you say something,
Carlo?
Okay,
you want? You can discuss
yes.
after.
I think it's a very, very important, extraordinary tonnage, this one. And other evidence of tonnage are the cargoes of marble I presented, which arrive to 350 tons, no more. And we have to arrive close, but not so close to these tonnages. We have to wait till the 16th century. I remember the Trinidad Valenciana, which was the chief ship of the Levantine fleet in the Invincible Armada, which arrived to 1,100 tons. So what do you think of this big gap we have from this tonnage to the tonnages we will find not before, not earlier, the 16th century?
I think that Patrice Paumet and André Tchernia wrote about this in their paper of 1982. Actually, this was not adapted to the commercial realities of this period, and it was too big. It was too big, and at the end, actually, they did not use it. They used it, but as a floating palace, actually. So maybe because the trade was too low. They did not build bigger ships after the Syracusia. But this episode is very interesting because it shows that actually the ancient, in the ancient world, they could build ships as big as they wanted, at least 2,000 or 3,000 tons.
Okay, thank you. I would like just to add that it's important, the tonnage, but you have to keep in mind that you need also to have the harbor that can host this big and huge giant, and the Syracusia was not able to stay in any port rather than Alexandria, and so then the necessity to have. So it's also to consider the necessity of a special type of commerce and a special type of trading that ask for huge tonnage. So with the asking of goods and supply in Rome, and then of course in that moment of the history, you find this huge tonnage also in Mediterranean and for the antiquity. So thank you, Emmanuel. It was very interesting papers. And now, okay, and now we can start with the second of the day. So Dr. Mohamed Abdelmagid, that is from the Central Department of Underwater Archaeology in Alexandria, and now guest researcher in Aix-Marseille University for this year. Thank you. So I don't know how to pass, or maybe someone can skip. Thank you.
This one?
They don't work. Only the pointer.
Only the pointer and here. Okay. So, hello everybody. I have to start by thanking the organizers, the University of Cyprus, and also the Honor Frost Foundation for hosting this conference. In fact, it is a very good opportunity for me again to see some old friends that we didn't see since 2008, when TROPIS stopped, and it was not easy to see everyone again. This just to say that Honor Frost remained in the minds of everyone, even in Alexandria, when we were celebrating the 20 years of the department. Honor Frost was the only foreigner that has been honored by the minister, the governor of Alexandria, and Bibliotheca Alexandrina and our department for her support of the underwater archaeology in Egypt. Now let's talk about Abu Rawash boat. In 2007, Jan Tristan from Macri University, in cooperation with the IFAO, started to re-excavate and fully document a site previously excavated in 1938 by Monte in the elite necropolis called Necropoli M at Abu Rawash near Giza. The aim was to clean the burial shaft of the archaic period cemetery and plotting a high-quality archaeological map of the site as well. In 2012, it was intended to clear the site at the area where Monte had located a wooden pavement just at the northern side of the mastaba number 6. The excavation revealed that what was seen by Monte was not a floor, but the remains of a wooden boat. It was found occupying 55% of a mud brick burial or pit. Abu Rawash boat lied on an east-west axis and was parallel to the northern wall of the mastaba. Like many other boat pits for kings or elite of the early dynastic period, such as in Saqqara, Abu Sir, and Abydos. The necropolis in general dates to the first dynasty. A stamp bearing the name of King Den, middle of the first dynasty, was found in the tomb. The radiocarbon dating for the wood of the boat, as well as straw from the mud brick of the enclosure, confirms the date of the boat, giving an approximate date to 2950 BC, which means that it is somehow contemporary to Abydos, grave boat number 10. After the documentation of the boat in situ as well as its pit, the hull has been consolidated and removed to the Conservation Center of the Grand Egyptian Museum, where the restoration, conservation, and preservation process was held. In the same place, documentation, including sketches, photos, 2D high-resolution scanner, and photogrammetry took place. The detailed drawings are not yet done. The remains that measure 6.53 meter long and 1.30 meter wide is composed mainly from 7 fragmented planks and some small fragments from acacia wood. The plank's thickness is between 4 and 6 centimeters, while the length and the width varies dramatically, reaching sometimes nearly 4.5 meter for the length and 35 centimeters for the width. The form of the planks is irregular, resembling most of the boats found except Abydos, that had nearly a rectangular section planks. The flat bottom includes several planks organized in 2 central strakes, comparing to Khufu boat that had 8 planks in 3 strakes. The strakes are fastened by stitching and the channels are localized near the edges of the planks.
The width of each channel varies from 7 to 8 centimeters, which makes 1 digit, 3 centimeters deep, while the distance between channels ranges between 7 to 9 centimeters, edge to edge, and they have an L shape because they open in the side of the plank and not outside or in the lower face of the plank. Sometimes the planks of the same strake were assembled with unpegged mortise and tenon alike hufu. Like here. Near the extreme edge of the port side and the starboard bottom strakes, several groups of 2 pairs of V-shaped channels were noticed. They measure 4.5 by 1.5 centimeter with 14 centimeter spacing between each pair. Obviously, they were for lashing frames to the hull. The interval between each group is 55 centimeter, except in one case it was 25 centimeter. This will be studied later. These strakes are slanted at their outer side with an angle of 105 degrees to guide the wall of the hull. The yellow color here represents the emplacement of the tenons used in their pre-assemblage to the first strake of the wall. The mortise for the tenon measure 2 by 2 centimeter, and the tenon is of 4 centimeter long. Contrary to other boat finds, the tenons are not long, not large, not very thick, and they don't fill their mortise. Missing a big part of the boat, we had to gather information on its dimension and shape from its pit and also the pit M3 that had also some few wood remains. The pit of the main boat M6 was approximately 60 meters long, 1.5 meters wide to its maximum dimension. In situ, molding of the profile or the section of the pit was made using molded and shaped wood to fit accurately with the pit shape or section in order to calculate the depth and profile or bilge angle. In brief, our boat has a ceremonial function, although that we have some proofs of previous use. It might measure 11 to 12 meters long, 1.4 meter wide, with a draught of 70 to 80 centimeters. It has a flat bottom with 2 central planks and a sharp bilge of around 110 degrees. Many fastening methods were used, such as stitching and unpegged tenon and mortise, as well as lashing for the frames. It surely has a slender crescent-shaped profile because of the high coefficient of the length, and it may look like this illustration. This is a suggestion made by the discoverer of Abu Sir North's boat remains. We are still working on the documentation of the boat, but the preliminary study shows that it shares some of the general characteristics and traditions of the Egyptian boat building, but it presents at the same time new features, especially for the early dynastic period boats. Because I don't have enough time here to present the resemblance and difference, I want to draw your attention to 2 dissimilarities between Abu Rawash and Abydos Graveboat 10. Abydos Graveboat 10 and Abu Rawash, in fact, they share the same navigation environment and function and period. So we can, in Abydos, we had a very restricted area of excavation, about 2.5 meters. We didn't find any clue for frames and we didn't find also any clue for tenons. But I think in the extremity of the boat, we might not found frames, and also we have a few number of tenons in our present boat. That's why I think reopening the excavation again in Abydos would elucidate some ambiguity that we found in Abydos until now, and Abu Rawash boat came to give us a lot of information and to show us that there is a lot of things that we can find or we can correct in the work of that has been done on Abydos boat. And finally, I wanted to put this picture of Cheryl Ward because it was one of the people who were always present in this conference, or the TROPIS, all the conference on shipbuilding, and she's not apparently interested anymore in nautical archaeology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and for this to keep the time first, and very interesting presentation. Are there some questions? Yes, Khalil, Hamad, please.
Anyway, do we know if that action was used in the water or not?
Yes, I said that we have some proof that it was used, and we think that it was used, maybe not so much in the water, but it was used really. And also we have other clues, but we are working on this because we found also the remains of beeswax, which means that maybe also it has a kind of intensity for the boat.
Okay, other questions? Otherwise, yes, Patrice, and then Ronald. Okay.
Just a remark about the importance of the discovery of the Abu Rawash boat, which is maybe one of the oldest plank bead boat ever known until today. And if we consider that the type of the boat is more or less the same as Abydos, the Abu Rawash boat brings us answer to many questions concerning this type of boat, and especially about the framing system. So that means there was a frame. We don't know if it was full frames or only bottom frames, but it's important to know because on Abydos, if we don't have frames, the boat cannot work. So Abu Rawash gives many answers about the first plank bead boat of the time. Thank you.
We had a provisional answer for Abydos, if you remember, that the weight of the wood would compensate the effect, but this is not, as we know, it doesn't work. And also we know in the tradition of building in Egyptian boats, the beams were the most important in the consolidation of the transversal strength for the boat.
Okay, very short, please.
Yes,
we have no time.
You didn't mention the timbers found at the necropolis of Tarkhan, excavated by Flinders Petrie before the First World War. Do you consider them not to be boat finds? Tarkhan.
No, Tarkhan, I didn't put all the comparison, but Tarkhan, for example, it has the same four channels for lashing, and from the time we have two groups, one who is saying that these are only sailing, and the other group are talking about ships. Okay. For me, I think it is a part of a boat, and I think with this discovery, maybe we will ascertain a little bit or confirm the idea of boat remains.
I'm really, really very sorry because we really have no time, and also so I pass to the third communication from Kevin Melia-Tenvan from the Texas A&M University doctorate program. So please, with this very interesting presentation on framing development from the 4th century to the 9th century AD. Thank you.
When I first began at the Nautical Archaeology program at Texas A&M, I quickly realized I was hugely interested in ancient ship construction. I usually feel pretty alone when I admit this, but I feel like I'm in good company here. At least I hope. In particular, I was fascinated with the transition from shell-based to frame-based ship construction. The genesis of my presentation and of my thesis was a fairly simple question. If the end product of the transition is the ability to base ship construction on frames, do we see developmental changes in framing from shell-based construction into frame-based construction? The starting point for my analysis begins in the 4th century BCE with the sudden appearance of a new framing system, full floor timbers alternating with paired half frames. This is a remarkable framing system if for no other reason than its longevity. It first appeared in the 4th century BCE and is attested until at least the 10th century CE. It is also remarkable in the fact that such a relatively simple framing system was used in such a wide range of ships. Merchantmen to galleys, 8-meter long ships to 35+ meter long ships. I've studied over 90 shipwrecks from around the Mediterranean whose preservation allowed for a study of their framing, and divided them into 5 different periods. The first is the introduction of this new framing system, which spreads quickly and stays relatively homogeneous. The second phase is delineated by a noticeable increase in the usage of asymmetrical framing timbers, both floor timbers and half frames. The third phase is marked by the introduction of overlapping half frames. The fourth phase I entitled Later Developments because while the changes are non-dramatic, they are still subtle and important when looking at the usage of framing in ships. The fifth and final phase is set around the introduction of inline framing to the Mediterranean. In the last quarter of the 4th century BCE, a new framing system is introduced, as seen in the Kyrenia shipwreck, which has been labeled, rather creatively, full floor timbers alternating with paired half frames. It is important to point out that when this framing arrangement first appears, it is paired with strong planking edge joinery. In the case of the Kyrenia shipwreck, peg, mortise, and tenon edge joinery. With few exceptions, this pairing dominates the Mediterranean until at least the late 4th, early 5th century CE, in which we begin to see a weakening in the planking edge joinery. This speaks to the conceptual role of framing in ships, but I will get to this in a moment. Within a century, this new framing system had spread from the eastern Mediterranean into the western Mediterranean, with examples in Italy and southern France, to name a few. Even within a few centuries, we can see that the generalities of this framing system had not changed. However, it is the early consistency among the early framing systems that leads me to believe that this framing arrangement dates to earlier than we have in the archaeological record. It is merely a matter of finding it, which I suppose is easier said than done. The role of framing in ships at this point is fairly straightforward. It is non-primary source of hull reinforcement. The most important source of hull strength in ships at this point comes from the strong edge joinery. Here is a general image of floor timbers alternating with paired half frames. You can see the floor timbers here, paired half frames extended by footings. On this image here, we can see that the floor timbers and the paired half frames overlap at the turn of the bilge, which is a high stress area of the hull. We can also see that this is a flat bottom ship. This should be a wine glass shaped hull, which is important when it comes to this framing system, as on a wine glass shaped hull, the garboard strike is inherently weak. Paired half frames offer a good method to reinforce this inherently weak garboard. Around the 1st to 2nd century CE, asymmetrical framing timbers become much more prominent in the archaeological record. I define asymmetrical framing timbers as either floor timbers or paired half frames that are not centered over the keel. I will show you in a moment. We have seen these in the archaeological record before, but they are almost always in the extremities of the vessel. This is because the extreme curvature of the hull at the extremities can force odd framing arrangements. The increased usage of asymmetrical framing timbers can be seen in shipwrecks from around the Mediterranean, including Israel, Italy, and France. We see varying degrees of asymmetry among ships, but one of the most extreme examples comes from the Lacedaemon ship, in which the asymmetry is so extreme it is difficult to distinguish some of the framing timber types. Some may think that this relatively sudden increased usage of asymmetrical framing timbers may be purposeful, the idea being to strengthen the hull and the framing by avoiding the alignment of the ends of the floor timbers and the ends of the half frames. However, I see little to no evidence of patterned use for asymmetrical framing timbers, which one would expect with shipwrights who have shown a historical proclivity for standardization. To me, this suggests that their use is a result of resource limitations. The role of framing has not changed at this point and is still a non-primary source of hull reinforcement. This is why I think shipwrights would not be worried about using asymmetrical framing timbers. We can see here various types of asymmetrical floor timbers as well as various types of asymmetrical paired half frames. When you use asymmetrical framing timbers, you are able to get away with using a shorter frame of shorter timber than you may have on a more standard arrangement of floor timbers alternating with paired half frames. Beginning in the 6th century CE, shipwrights begin to overlap their paired half frames while still using traditional floor timbers. This first appears with the Door 2001/1 shipwreck, which in addition to being overlapped, were scarfed, nailed to each other, and certain pairs were nailed to the keel. The use of overlapping paired half frames is also seen on shipwrecks from the Yanakapa excavation. This is clearly a purposeful method to add strength to the framing system as well as to the overall hull. In the case of the Door 2001/1 shipwreck, this may possibly be a response to the lack of planking edge joinery. The role of framing at this period is unclear to me due to the limited and geographically restricted nature of our evidence, as most of our well-preserved shipwrecks from this time period come from either the Door Tentur Lagoon or the Yanakapa excavations. We can see here floor timbers with overlapping paired half frames. Here they're scarfed, though on the Door 2001 the scarf is more elongated than this. Around the 7th century CE, we can see clear conceptual development with the use of frames in ship construction. Firstly, with the Yasiata 7th century, we have the first clear evidence of the attachment of planking to pre-standing frames above the waterline. We can also see that framing is more strongly integrated into the upper hull. Specifically, we see a progression in the way that the whale and framing are integrated at Yasiata. With the Yasiata 5th century shipwreck, the frame and whale attachment is not differentiated from the rest of the frame and planking attachment. By the time we get to the 7th century CE, both whales are being bolted to every 4th or 5th frame. With bolt staggering, this leads to essentially every frame being bolted to a whale. Time and effort is specifically being taken to integrate framing and the upper hull of the ship. It is these differences in the usage of frames that leads me to believe that we should differentiate between two transitions. First, the transition away from shell-based ship construction reliant upon strong mortise and tenon edge joinery, or planking edge joinery. The other, the transition towards frame-based construction. The weakening of planking edge joinery does not imply progression towards frame-based construction. Instead, we need to see conceptual change in the way that framing is used before we can begin to talk about a transition towards frame-based ship construction. Phase 5 is centered around the introduction of inline framing to the Mediterranean, which as of now is dated to the early 9th century CE in Constantinople, though with the refinement of dating of the Unicopper Rex, I'm confident that it will actually be pushed back to the late 8th century CE. When I talk about inline framing, this would be L-shaped floor timbers that alternate their long arm from port to starboard across the ship with partnered buttocks. This framing system likely originated in the rivers of Eastern Europe. It has been argued that this framing system followed down the Danube River Valley through continental Europe into the Black Sea. This would explain why this framing arrangement first appears in Constantinople. We have a brief period of overlap between these framing systems, but eventually, by the 10th or 11th century, inline framing had replaced floor timbers alternating with paired half frames as a dominant framing system. The speed of this replacement is remarkable and must mean that this new framing system must have offered some sort of significant advantage to shipwrights. Here we can see the L-shaped floor timbers alternating their long arms from port to starboard across the hull with partnered buttocks. This is a brief timeline of what I've gone over. The introduction of floor timbers alternating with paired half frames, the increased usage of asymmetrical framing timbers around the 1st or 2nd century, the appearance of overlapping paired half frames around the 6th century, and ultimately the introduction of inline framing. This is a tentative timeline and subject to change pending further discovery and excavation. I hope I have shown that the arrangement of floor timbers alternating with paired half frames has gone through subtle but distinct phases of development. However, it is ultimately replaced by inline framing, the framing system that we do see on the Cerce Lamane shipwreck, which has been, up until recently, the first widely accepted frame-based ship. The 6th through 9th century CE are a hugely pivotal time period in ship construction and the transition towards frame-based construction. More shipwrecks from a wider geographic context would greatly increase our understanding of this transition towards frame-based ship construction. When it comes to inline framing, a detailed study of ancient ship construction in the Eastern European river systems, particularly focused on framing, will help us not only better understand the transition towards frame-based ship construction, but also how knowledge and technological methods were transferred. I hope I have shown that there is value in detailed study of individual construction features in addition to larger trends and trying to understand the transition from shell-based construction and towards frame-based ship construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that this topic will raise a lot of discussion and questions. So, anybody? Yes, please.
Have you tried to check the origins of the timbers and tried to relate these developments with any regional construction techniques? Was it uniform throughout the Mediterranean, or was it different in different places?
The tree species would vary on given shipwrecks. I did not look very closely at tree species, but I do think we're seeing regional development, particularly in the 6th century onward with the Dortentor Lagoon shipwrecks, which I think very much there seems to be a regional development taking place there, as well as what we see in Constantinople with the introduction of inline framing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, before Patrice, because you told me. Yeah, okay, but yes. There is this. Not short. Well, you can. Il faut parler à vous.
Ah, wait. Sorry. Thank you. So, you are right. If you consider that. Okay, you are right, considering the importance of the evolution of the framing on the transition between cell to skeleton. But it is not the sole feature. You have also to consider the general architectural system.
Absolutely.
And in the different example you give, you have very, very different architectural system. By example, when you are speaking about the first evolution with asymmetrical frame, you have also to consider a quite different system of architectural system with a new fitting of the mass step timber and so on, which play an important role on the homogeneity of the structure. And we have very early example of online framing on the wreck Dramont A of the 1st century BC. We have a long sequence with just floor timber without any old frame, and so on. And about door and Tantura boats, we have a very light framing, but we have also a very quite different system, architectural system, with a flat-bottomed boat, with a sharp build, and so on. So I think we don't have a linear evolution, but we have to take in consideration the different geographical, historical context. And in my opinion, Western Mediterranean, the evolution on the Western Mediterranean is quite different from the Eastern Mediterranean. And on the Eastern Mediterranean, you have different origin. Dortentor is a specific one.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I think that we do need to look at other features in conjunction with these individual features. I just think that we should also be trying to focus on some of these features and not... Steffi had a famous line of, we're losing the forest for the trees. And I think the trees and the forest are both important. We need to look at both.
Yes. There is a person over there. Yes, please.
Thank you for that talk. That's fascinating. I was wondering if you have modeled any of these different systems. I was wondering if you have modeled any of these systems for stress factors in the various that can actually model the stress factors to see what the strengths and weaknesses of the different alternating timbers, et cetera, are.
I have not yet, but that is something I'd like to explore. I think that'd be the next step in terms, we talk in generalities about stronger and weaker, but I think if we should try to find a way to quantify when we talk about a stronger hull, stronger framing system, stronger longitudinal structure, and not just talk in generalities about it. I do think quantification is the next step.
Okay, I have the bad job. There is Carlo. Yes, please show.
Yes. Can you tell something more about the evidence you are quoted about these boats from the 9th century AD with floor timbers with an L shape from the river of Eastern Europe, please?
That was actually from a Van Doornik paper. I have some of the notes on me.
Or maybe you can discuss during the pausa, during our breakfast for this quotation. Okay, so we have the last presentation of the day, and so from the University of Melbourne, I have to put my. So the development of Roman merchant ship sail plan, Christopher John Davey. So thank you for the.
Good morning. I think it's appropriate that somebody from Melbourne University speaks at this conference. My colleague William Cullican has already been mentioned. He worked with Honor Frost on many occasions in the 1960s and 70s. Sadly died in 1983. His archive is now with the Australian Institute of Archaeology, which I direct, and his correspondence with Honor Frost is in that archive. I'm going to flick through slides from time to time, but I just point out that on my academia website there are a couple of papers that address the issues that I'm going to be speaking about. My background, I knew Honor Frost in London in the 1970s, and it was clear to me that if I was going to have a life in maritime archaeology, I was going to have to be of independent means. I've achieved that, but it took a lifetime, and so rather belatedly here I am. One of the things I have actually been able to do, and that is to sail throughout my life, and I've often sailed, I still sail a laser. It's a very difficult boat to sail in high winds, and the techniques that I've learnt in relation to sailing upwind have helped me in the preparation of this paper. The question as to whether you can sail upwind has been addressed by Dr. Julian Whitewright, and this is one of his summaries. He looked at the experience with replicas, and he did voyage analysis and came to the conclusion that there was a fair amount of sailing upwind. And examples are, for example, the Kyrene. You can see the flag just there. It's clear that the boat at this point is sailing upwind, albeit in very light conditions. But this is only part of the story. Well, my first comment is just to make about this text by Peripatectic, Mechanica, Problem 7. Two translations there, one by Het and one by Casson. Neither of them are consistent or make sense. And my colleagues at the University of New England have suggested an alternative approach, and that is to see the text as being about going about, that is, changing from one tack to another. And so the diagram here, to continue out on a tack is unfavourable, and the favoured wind is in fact would be coming on the other side of the boat. To achieve that requires going about. Indeed, as you read on the rest of the text, it's dealing with issues associated with getting a boat away from the wind. As many of you know, it's easy to get a boat to go up head to wind. To get it away from the wind, particularly in strong winds, is often very difficult. And the techniques that are adopted are mentioned here, something that are known to most sailors. Cecil Tor, who wrote in the time when boats were still, square-rigged boats were still common, agrees, and although he didn't give a translation of the text, he sees it as being a text about going about and the issues of associated with that. The problem is that going about is not easy if you just have a one-sailed, square-rigged boat, and the experience with the Kyrenia too is a case in point, and indeed just going to windward was often problematic. It's an issue of control, not an issue of whether it's possible or not. To deal with this, I'm going to first of all look at the iconography, and most of this will be familiar with you, for you, and I'll just flick through, but I'm drawing attention to the fact that a lot of these boats, most of these boats have a spar over the bow of the boat and a small sail rigged on it. Particularly common amongst a lot of the Roman period graffiti. Even in the square of the corporations at Ostia, the ships with small sails on bowsprits are quite common. And while there's a range of different rigs, it's the square-rigged boats with the small sail that are the most common. And this leads Landstrom to reconstruct in this way, and what we have here is the sail out the front, a spritsail. Now the issue is, what was a spritsail used for? And if you look up the literature, you will find that there's quite a few comments to the effect that spritsails are not well understood today, and that there is very little information about the spritsail. However, I'm afraid I've got a notice here. Could you come and have a look at it, please, for me? Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Quit was the answer. A Melbourne-born mariner, Alan Villiers, sailed many square-rigged ships, and one in particular, he skippered the Mayflower II, a replica, which is seen here as he sails it into New York Harbour in 1957. And in his book about his experiences, he goes on for quite a few pages about the spritsail. He was not, having been used to using and sailing in clipper ships, he was not so used to this, and he found that the spritsail, which you see here, rigged, the boat is hard on the wind coming into the harbour, and they are shortening sail. And as you read, the spritsail he found it a magnificent sail. The problems, there were many problems with it. He goes on, as I say, for a number of pages, and he indicates that it made the Mayflower one of the most manoeuvrable ships that he had ever sailed, and it was the spritsail that was largely responsible for that. However, the spritsail did have a number of issues. It was a difficult sail to use. You could get your boat into trouble very quickly, particularly at night. However, he was quite convinced that if you knew how to use a spritsail, you could make your boat go anywhere. He was talking there specifically about getting the head of the ship away from the wind, but just in fact going upwind and maintaining control as you go to windward. Here's a diagram with the centre of lateral resistance and the centre of effort. The combining of the force of the spritsail with the mainsail gives, you aim to have the centre of effort just behind the centre of lateral resistance. The point is that operating a small sail like this is comparatively easy, and as you adjust the power in the small sail, so it adjusts the position of the overall aerodynamics of the rig, and through this method you can steer upwind. Further evidence for the spritsail, here's just a couple of examples. The people who published these graffito both make the comment that it looks like it was done by mariners because they are able to continue and do an X-ray image showing things that only a mariner would know about. And in both cases they bring the spritsail, the bowsprit, down right into the hull. The point is that this is not a mast, this is a bowsprit, and it has to be secured to the hull so that the transverse forces that are being applied to the hull to maintain direction can actually steer the boat. I'm indebted to Professor Beltrame for his paper of, I think it was about 1976, and this is his reconstruction. He's identified 5 shipwrecks where there's a slot somewhat near the bow, and this is the reconstruction. It is significant. There's no vertical reinforcement in the keelson. However, there's a slot which maintains the transitional forces. It is, I think, significant that if you go through the shipwreck record, this is earliest to latest, and I'm plotting here the lengths of ships. Around 150 BC, you start to get a significant increase in ship lengths in the shipwreck record. Some of these ships that are earlier have already been published as merchant galleys. So that would explain why there are some that are reasonable length prior to that. So it was the control that the spritsail offered that gave the capacity to increase the size of ship, and as a result you have the development of the bulk grain import-export business that underpinned much of the Roman Empire. In terms of the origin of the sail, for Casson, all 4 sails are the same. Some are big, some are small. The spritsail is not a foresail. It's a manoeuvring sail. It does not provide power so much as it aids manoeuvrability, and it has to have been developed quite independently. And so we find that the literature referring to the Arteman commences in the 2nd century BC, and we also have the evidence of the larger merchant ships developing at the same time. So that seems like a reasonable period when this development occurred. And so to finalise, to summarise, two issues: the adoption of the spritsail as a means of manoeuvring and controlling ships in the 2nd century BC resulted in the change in the trade patterns for what was to become the Roman Empire, and the development of bulk commodity trade. And the second point, second concluding point, is that as a result of the adoption of this sail, the ships of the Roman Empire could pretty much sail anywhere they liked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are questions on... Yes.
Is there any relation between the disappearance of the spritzel and the commencement of the small mizzen as an aid to maneuvering? Because I don't think that you ever saw both of them together.
No, I didn't. There's an image there which showed a three-masted Roman ship with a mizzen, which would have been the steering sail. And so it would appear that that development occurred in the Roman period. I just haven't taken the matter forward to try and develop the sail plan of the Roman period into that area. But it would seem fairly clear that they understood if they could stick a sail out the front and manoeuvre the ship, they could do the same by putting a sail at the back. Does that help? Or
is it in a way the precursor of the jib, a kind of the spritzel?
Please say again.
Is the spritzel forerunner of the modern jib in a way?
I think it probably is. The spritzel went out of fashion for a range of reasons. One is that the bowsprit started to come lower, and the sail started to fill up with water, and so the idea of putting a fore-aft sail would be reasonably logical. The spritzel was quite a handful to manoeuvre.
Okay, there are 3 questions more. Patrice, please, very short. Because
yes, so just two remarks about la Madrague de Gien, which was probably the biggest merchant ship of the Roman period found until now. We don't have both spritsail, but we have probably a full main foresail. And probably the type of the boat is similar to the Mosaïque des Silectins on Place des Corporations. So we have this system of a large main foresail. And if I'm right, the oldest example we know about the foresail is given by a fragment of ceramic of the archaic period of the 6th century BC. It was published by Lionel Casson for the first time. So you're
talking about the Tarquinia?
No, before Tarquinia. Okay. In 6th century BC, we have a fragment of Attic pottery with a boat with foresail. It's important. It was published by Lionel Casson. So the question is a relationship between the two systems of sailing. Yeah.
So we have a problem because other people are still outside, so I have really not so much time. Maybe Pierre, because you booked before, and then we have the second, but very, very short.
Yeah, it's just a remark on the fact that with Gyptis, which is a small boat, we were able to tack quite successfully every time without oars, because you just have to ail on the brails, passing through the wind, and then to lower it when the yard is on the right position. So that's okay for small boats. And the other consideration is that we have also many examples of square sailing vessels which are well balanced. So that's just...
How many tons?
it's Jules Verne 9, so it's fully loaded with screw. We are between 1.5 tons and 2 tons of displacement.
I think once you get merchant ships with maybe 9, 10 tons and so on, it's a bit different. The same applies to the Viking. They're hot rods, they just around they go. But once you start to put a bit of weight in them, you're going to find it a lot more difficult to get around.
Okay, the last, very, very last, fast, please.
Yeah.
It's okay? Yeah, please. Otherwise you go out to it.
I'll shout. Just a comment really about your comments about the Spritzel. From when we built the Doifken replica in Western Australia some years ago, that was obviously a vessel from the 1590s, but we thought when we built it that we knew how square-sill vessels sailed, and we went through a complete learning curve when we discovered that in fact you didn't use the whipstaff to steer the vessel. It was entirely done with the Spritzel. So even as late as that period, in a vessel which also had a mizzen, the Spritzel was definitely the steering sail, and that was its major purpose.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, people think that you steer a boat with the rudder. No, you don't. You steer it with the sails, and the Spritzel was the way in which they did it. And the Dutch actually have written a certain amount about using the Spritzel, or more to the point, when you don't use it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for everybody for this first session. And I'm sure that the discussion will continue, and so see you later after lunch here for the second part with Jamal. For the photo also outside. So before lunch, do the photo.